When The Wonder Years premiered in 1988, it did not present itself as a sitcom nor as a nostalgic comedy in the conventional sense. It arrived as a memory already fading. From its opening moments, framed by period music and a reflective adult voice, the series announced its true subject. Not childhood itself, but the distance between who we were and who we became. The laughter was never the point. The ache was. One of the most unusual facts about The Wonder Years is that it was conceived backwards. The creators did not begin with jokes or episodic plots. They began with a voice, an adult consciousness looking back with clarity, regret, and affection. That narration was not added to decorate the show, it was its spine. Without it, the series would collapse into anecdote. With it, every small moment carried the weight of time. Whilst the decision to set the story in the late 1960s was not merely nostalgic, it was strategic. This was a period often remembered through myth, prosperity, optimism, unity, but lived through confusion, social fracture, and quiet fear. The Wonder Years places its child protagonist inside that contradiction. Kevin Arnold grows up not in a golden age, but in a country learning to question itself. The personal and the historical are allowed to coexist without explanation. A revealing detail is that Kevin is not portrayed as exceptional. He is not particularly talented, brave, or charismatic. He is average by design. The creators wanted a protagonist who would disappear into memory rather than dominate it. This choice allows the audience to project themselves into the narrative. Kevin does not lead the story, he receives it. The adult narrator's tone is central to the show's identity. He does not mock his younger self, nor does he romanticize him. He observes with compassion sharpened by hindsight. This balance is rare. Most coming-of-age stories either sentimentalize youth or critique it. The Wonder Years does both simultaneously, often within the same sentence. That duality gives the series its emotional credibility. One little-known fact is that the narration was written after the episodes were shot. Scenes were filmed quietly, often without knowing exactly how they would be framed by memory. This allowed performances to remain natural, unburdened by moral emphasis. The voiceover later added meaning, not instruction. It feels like reflection, not commentary. The suburban setting is deliberately restrained. Houses look similar, streets repeat. Its interiors feel modest and functional. This uniformity is essential. The Wonder Years is not about place as spectacle, but as container. The sameness of the environment amplifies the significance of small changes. A new haircut, a raised voice, a closed door. When everything looks stable, emotion becomes seismic. Music plays a defining role, but not as nostalgia bait. Period songs are used sparingly, often ironically. A cheerful track might underscore disappointment. A romantic song might accompany confusion. The show understands that memory does not preserve moments as they were, but as they felt. Music becomes emotional shorthand, not historical accuracy. A particularly striking fact is that the show avoided laugh tracks entirely, an unusual choice for network television at the time. Silence was allowed to exist. Awkward pauses were not filled. Emotional beats were trusted to land without reinforcement. This restraint elevated the material, allowing humor and sadness to coexist without competition. Kevin's relationship with Winnie Cooper is the emotional axis of the series, but it is never framed as destiny. Winnie is not a prize to be won. She is a presence that evolves, recedes, returns, and changes meaning over time. Their connection is defined more by timing than by passion. The Wonder Years treats first love not as triumph, but as imprint. A subtle but important detail is how the show depicts masculinity through Kevin's father, Jack Arnold. He is distant, stern, and emotionally inaccessible, not because he lacks feeling, but because he lacks language. The series does not condemn him, it contextualizes him. Jack represents a generation taught to provide rather than express. His silences are not cruelty, they are inheritance. The dynamic between Kevin's parents is another quiet triumph. Their marriage is not romanticized but respected. They argue, miscommunicate, disappoint each other. Yet there is a deep, unspoken loyalty beneath it all. The Wonder Years presents adult love not as ideal but as durable. This realism grounds the series in emotional truth. One lesser-known production choice was the insistence on shooting many scenes at child eye level. The camera often sits lower than in traditional family shows, subtly aligning perspective with Kevin's emotional experience. Adults loom larger. Rooms feel more imposing. This visual language reinforces the sense of childhood as a state of limited control. Yet the school environment is portrayed with similar honesty. Teachers are not villains or heroes. They are distracted, imperfect, occasionally kind. Bullies are not exaggerated monsters. They are insecure children given temporary power. The Wonder Years refuses caricature. Everyone exists within their limitations. Another unusual fact is that the show rarely revisits major events. Moments that feel monumental in one episode are rarely referenced again. This reflects the nature of memory. Some experiences define us without becoming part of our daily narrative. The series honors that quiet persistence rather than forcing continuity. Kevin's friendships are fluid, sometimes painful. Paul, his closest friend, is loyal but fragile. Their bond is sincere yet strained by growth and divergence. And The Wonder Years acknowledges that friendship in youth is often based on proximity rather than compatibility, and that this does not make it less meaningful. The adult narrator often reveals outcomes long after events occur, sometimes dismantling the emotional importance they once held. A triumphant moment may lead nowhere. A humiliating experience may become irrelevant. This narrative choice reinforces the series' central truth. Meaning is assigned over time, not in the moment. A revealing detail is that the show frequently ends episodes not with resolution, but with acceptance. Problems are not solved, they are absorbed. Kevin does not become wiser overnight, he becomes older. This refusal to offer tidy lessons distinguishes The Wonder Years from moralistic television. The historical backdrop, Vietnam, civil rights, or political unrest, is present but never foregrounded. These events drift through the series like distant weather. They influence mood, language, and fear, but rarely drive plot. This mirrors the way children experience history, indirectly through adult behavior and emotional climate. One particularly poignant fact is that the show's creators insisted that Kevin's future not be portrayed as extraordinary. The adult narrator is not famous, wealthy, or powerful. He is simply reflective. This choice preserves the integrity of the series. The Wonder Years is not about becoming someone important. It is about becoming someone aware. In its opening movement, the series establishes a tone that is deceptively gentle. The stories are small. The stakes appear modest. Yet beneath this simplicity lies a rigorous emotional intelligence. The Wonder Years understands that childhood is not remembered for its events, but for how those events felt before we knew how to name them. The first part of the series does not ask the audience to laugh at youth, nor to mourn it prematurely. It asks something quieter and more demanding, to remember honestly. To recall not just the sweetness, but the confusion. Not just the innocence, but the embarrassment, the longing, the silence at the dinner table. This is how The Wonder Years begins. Not with a punchline, but with a memory already in motion. A voice speaking from the far side of experience. A boy walking home, unsure why something hurt, only that it did. And an audience invited not to watch childhood unfold, but to feel it slipping away, even as it happens. As The Wonder Years settles into its second movement, the series begins to explore not just memory, but consequence. Childhood is no longer presented as a collection of isolated moments. Patterns emerge, choices echo. The distance between what Kevin feels and what he understands grows wider, and that gap becomes the series' most fertile emotional ground. The narration deepens, not to explain events, but to acknowledge what could not be grasped at the time. One of the most revealing aspects of this middle phase is how the show allows disappointment to accumulate quietly. There are no grand failures, no dramatic turning points. Instead, there is the steady erosion of certainty. Kevin learns that effort does not guarantee reward, that sincerity does not ensure clarity, and that adults do not always know what they are doing. These realizations arrive without ceremony, which makes them more durable. A little-known fact is that many of the show's most emotionally complex episodes were written without traditional punchlines. Writers were encouraged to end scenes where they naturally resolved, even if that meant unresolved silence. This approach was unusual for network television, but it allowed emotional truth to take precedence over structure. The Wonder Years trusted its audience to sit with ambiguity. Kevin's internal life becomes more articulated during this phase, but not more confident. His thoughts grow sharper, yet his actions remain tentative. The contrast is intentional. The series captures a universal experience, the moment when awareness outpaces agency. Kevin understands more than he can act upon, and that imbalance creates frustration, shame, art, and longing in equal measure. The adult narrator plays a crucial role here by occasionally puncturing the emotional intensity of a moment with hindsight. A scene that feels monumental to young Kevin is later revealed to have led nowhere. This narrative choice is not cynical, it is compassionate. It acknowledges how deeply we feel things that later fade without dismissing the authenticity of those feelings when they occurred. Kevin's relationship with Winnie becomes more fragile in this movement, not because of betrayal or conflict, but because of timing. The series repeatedly returns to the idea that affection alone is insufficient. Circumstance, fear, and miscommunication intervene. Winnie grows quieter, more self-contained. Kevin grows more introspective. Their connection is defined less by closeness than by near misses. One subtle but important detail is how the show uses physical distance to mirror emotional separation. Characters are framed across rooms, through doorways, or at opposite ends of a table. These compositions reinforce the idea that intimacy is not always about proximity. The Wonder Years uses space to express what dialogue cannot. The portrayal of adolescence is particularly restrained. Puberty is not treated as comedy or spectacle, but as confusion. Changes arrive without explanation. Bodies feel unfamiliar. Social hierarchies shift unpredictably. The series avoids exaggeration, choosing instead to depict embarrassment as quiet and internal. This realism is one of its most enduring strengths. A revealing production detail is that many episodes were shot with longer takes during emotionally sensitive scenes. Plus, directors were instructed not to interrupt performances unless absolutely necessary. This allowed discomfort to linger on screen. The Wonder Years understands that emotional growth often happens in pauses, not speeches. Kevin's friendships continue to evolve in uneven ways. Paul remains loyal, but their bond is strained by differing emotional needs. Kevin wants affirmation. Paul wants safety. Neither can articulate this difference. The show treats their drifting not as betrayal, but as a natural consequence of growth. Friendship, like childhood itself, is not permanent. It is situational. The school environment grows more complex during this phase. Authority figures are no longer simply distant, they are inconsistent. Teachers disappoint. Coaches contradict themselves. Rules feel arbitrary. And Kevin begins to understand that systems are maintained by people, and people are flawed. This realization quietly undermines the sense of order that once felt reassuring. Jack Arnold's character gains unexpected depth in these episodes. Small gestures, a ride home, a shared silence, a moment of pride withheld, carry emotional weight. The show reveals that Jack's reserve is not absence, but compression. His generation learned to survive by containing emotion. Kevin senses this, but lacks the tools to bridge the gap. A particularly poignant detail is how the series depicts work through Jack's experience. His job is not glamorous nor fulfilling, but necessary. The Wonder Years presents adulthood not as freedom, but as responsibility layered with resignation. This portrayal grounds the series in realism and challenges idealized visions of maturity. The mother, Norma Arnold, becomes increasingly central in this movement. She represents quiet adaptation. Her intelligence, curiosity, and patience are often constrained by domestic expectations. Episodes that focus on her inner life reveal a woman negotiating between personal aspiration and familial duty. The series treats her choices with respect, not judgment. One lesser-known fact is that the writers deliberately avoided giving Norma dramatic story arcs. Her development is incremental, subtle, and often internal. This mirrors the lived experience of many women of her generation, whose growth occurred without recognition or applause. The Wonder Years honors that reality by allowing her evolution to remain understated. The historical context becomes more emotionally present during this phase. News of war, protests, and political upheaval filters into domestic spaces. Kevin does not fully understand these events, but he feels their impact through adult tension and unspoken fear. The series captures how children absorb history not through facts, but through atmosphere. Music continues to play a crucial role, but its use becomes more selective. Songs are often placed at emotional turning points, not to heighten sentiment, but to anchor memory. The lyrics rarely align perfectly with the scene. Instead, they create resonance, suggesting that memory itself is imperfect and associative. Kevin's moral understanding also becomes more complicated. He begins to recognize hypocrisy in himself and others. Moments of kindness are followed by selfishness. Good intentions lead to harm. The series does not punish these contradictions, it observes them. Growing up, it suggests, is not about becoming better, but about becoming aware. A notable narrative choice is the way the show handles regret. The adult narrator does not dwell on missed opportunities with bitterness. Instead, he acknowledges them as inevitable. This tone prevents the series from collapsing into nostalgia. The Wonder Years does not long for the past. It examines it. Episodes in this middle section often end with Kevin alone, walking, sitting, thinking. These solitary moments are not framed as sadness, but as processing. The series recognizes solitude as a necessary component of emotional development. Not all growth happens in relationship, some happens in reflection. But one particularly striking fact is that the show rarely uses explicit lessons. Characters do not summarize experiences or articulate takeaways. Meaning is inferred, not delivered. This approach respects the audience's intelligence and mirrors the way understanding actually forms over time. As this second movement draws toward its close, the tone of the series subtly shifts. Innocence has not vanished, but it has thinned. The world feels less forgiving, more complex. Kevin has not lost his sensitivity, but he has lost certainty, and that loss becomes the foundation for everything that follows. The Wonder Years in this phase refuses to rush maturation. It allows confusion to persist. It allows contradictions to remain unresolved. Childhood does not end with a revelation. It dissolves gradually, leaving traces behind. And what the series achieves here is rare. It captures the middle space between who we were and who we are becoming. The space where memory begins to form, even as experience is still unfolding. The adult voice looks back, not to correct the past, but to acknowledge its texture. This second part does not prepare the audience for closure. It prepares them for complexity, for the understanding that growing up is not a straight line, but a layering of moments that only later reveal their shape. And in that layered accumulation of disappointments, affections, silences, and small victories, The Wonder Years continues its quiet, devastating work, reminding us that the most important changes in our lives rarely announce themselves, and that by the time we recognize them, they are already memories. As The Wonder Years enters its final movement, the series abandons any remaining illusion that growing up can be understood while it is happening. What takes shape now is not revelation, but reckoning. The adult narrator no longer speaks merely to contextualize childhood moments. He speaks to acknowledge what those moments became. Memory stops being a refuge and turns into a mirror. One of the most striking facts about this final phase is that the series never attempts to dramatize adulthood itself. We do not see Kevin as a man living an extraordinary life. We hear him instead, measured, reflective, restrained. This absence is intentional. The Wonder Years understands that adulthood is not defined by events, but by interpretation. The narrator's authority comes not from success, but from survival with awareness intact. Kevin's emotional world reaches its most fragile state here, not because of crisis, but because of accumulation. Losses are small but persistent. Friendships thin. Certainties dissolve. The show resists the temptation to frame these changes as tragedy. Instead, it presents them as quiet erosion, the kind that reshapes landscapes without announcement. Childhood does not end with a door slammed shut. It fades. A little-known detail is that the writers intentionally avoided giving Kevin a single defining farewell moment. There's no graduation speech, no decisive break, no final triumph or collapse. This choice reflects a deep understanding of memory. We rarely remember the end of an era as it happens. We recognize it later through contrast. Kevin's relationship with Winnie reaches its most honest expression in this phase, precisely because it never resolves into permanence. Their bond becomes symbolic rather than functional. She represents not a future partner, but a version of the self that can no longer be accessed. The Wonder Years treats first love as a landmark, not a destination. The adult narrator's handling of Winnie is especially restrained. He does not elevate her to myth, nor does he diminish her importance. He simply acknowledges that some relationships are meaningful because they end. This refusal to romanticize loss gives the series its emotional maturity. One subtle but powerful narrative choice is how the show reveals the futures of secondary characters. These revelations arrive briefly, sometimes casually, often without sentiment. A friend moves away. Another struggles. Someone disappears from Kevin's life without ceremony. The series does not dramatize these departures because that is not how they occur in reality. People leave without explanation, and understanding arrives too late to intervene. Paul's fate, in particular, is handled with devastating simplicity. The adult narrator reflects on their friendship with affection and distance, recognizing that closeness in youth does not guarantee proximity in adulthood. The series frames this not as failure, but as inevitability. Time does not honor loyalty, it honors movement. The portrayal of Kevin's family reaches its emotional apex in this final movement. Jack Arnold's complexity becomes fully visible only in hindsight. Moments once perceived as cold are reinterpreted as constrained care. The adult narrator grants his father a generosity that childhood could not. This reevaluation is one of the series' most poignant achievements. A revealing fact is that many viewers only fully understood Jack's character once they themselves became parents. The Wonder Years anticipated this delayed comprehension. It trusted that its audience would grow into the show, discovering new meanings as their own lives evolved. Norma Arnold's quiet resilience is similarly reframed. Her sacrifices, once invisible to Kevin, are now acknowledged with clarity and respect. The series never suggests she was trapped, only constrained by circumstance. Her strength lies in continuity, not rebellion. The Wonder Years honors forms of courage that do not announce themselves. The historical backdrop recedes further in this final act, not because it loses importance, but because it has been absorbed. The Vietnam War, social unrest, cultural shifts, these are no longer distant noises. They have shaped the adults Kevin will become. The show understands that history's deepest impact is not informational, but formative. Music in this phase is used with particular restraint. Familiar songs return, but they feel altered by context. What once sounded hopeful now carries irony. What once felt sad now carries warmth. This shifting emotional register mirrors the way memory itself reorients experience over time. One particularly telling detail is how often the adult narrator admits uncertainty. He does not claim full understanding. He acknowledges misjudgments, missed signals, and emotional blindness. This humility distinguishes the Wonder Years from didactic storytelling. The series does not pretend that wisdom clarifies everything. It only deepens perspective. The final episodes emphasize separation, not as drama, but as condition. People move on, lives diverge, the neighborhood remains, but its meaning changes. The show captures the unsettling truth that continuity of place does not guarantee continuity of experience. A lesser-known creative decision was the insistence that the final narration avoid summarizing Kevin's life. There is no inventory of achievements, no declaration of fulfillment. The adult voice speaks instead about distance, about how far those years feel and how close they remain emotionally. The ending resists closure because memory itself resists it. The last reflections offered by the series do not elevate childhood as a golden age. They recognize it as a state of intensity, where feelings are immediate, unfiltered, and often misunderstood. The adult narrator does not wish to return. He wishes only to remember accurately. In its final moments, The Wonder Years affirms its central thesis, that growing up is not about becoming someone else, but about learning how to carry who you were without distortion. The past is not something to escape or idealize. It is something to integrate. The series closes without spectacle. No swelling music, no definitive image of success or failure. Just a recognition that time has passed, that people have changed, and that memory remains as both companion and burden. What makes this ending endure is its restraint. The Wonder Years does not claim that childhood explains everything. It suggests something quieter and more profound, that understanding ourselves requires returning, again and again, to moments that once confused us, and granting them the compassion we lacked at the time. In the end, the show leaves us not with answers, but with permission, to remember without embarrassment, to feel without apology, and to accept that the most formative years of our lives are often the ones we understood least when we were living them. The Wonder Years concludes as it began, with a voice looking back, not to correct the past, but to honor it. A recognition that those years were not wonderful because they were easy, but because they mattered. And that mattering, once felt, never entirely fades.